speaker is Linda Zhang. Linda is the Australian Pacific lead for CRU's Batteries Minerals team, where she leads thought leadership on supply chain policies, evolving technology trends and strategic company approaches.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda. So I lead CRU's battery material research in APAC. I'm based in Singapore. So thank you so much for Paydirt for inviting me to speak today. I'm very excited to share with you some of the key discoveries from our recent research. So in today's presentation, I'm going to firstly walk you through some of the key challenges that we have observed across the value chain. And afterwards, we're going to highlight some of the opportunities as a result of the policy response with a specific focus on IRA. Lastly, we're going to take you to the translation of what all these opportunities and risks means for the raw material suppliers, and particularly in Australia. Sorry, the green one? The big one. Yeah, okay, thank you. So here, we highlight some of the key challenges that we have observed across the value chain. So over the past few months, we have seen an intensifying competition as well as shrinking profit margins across the value chain. And that is a direct result of the overcapacity situation. It was also worth noticing that the regulation uncertainties are also unsettling the manufacturers. In some areas such as China, the pullback of subsidies has squeezed the manufacturers and incentivized them to seek overseas opportunities. In other regions, such as in the US, the policymakers are incentivizing the overseas producers to invest in locally and onshore the battery value chain. Now, to understand where the intense competition comes from, let's take a quick recap. So the Chinese subsidies over the past 10 years has successfully cultivated the domestic EV industry. While objectively, it has achieved a high level of success, but it also caused an overflow of investment into this industry. As you can see from the bottom left-hand side chart, that there is an overcapacity situation, not only in battery, but also in the midstream sectors. Now, as a result of the domestic market becoming increasingly saturated, manufacturers are looking outside of China and moving overseas at alarming speed. And the OEMs and battery manufacturers are not only moving by themselves, they're also taking their suppliers with them to ensure a seamless production. Now, here's a question. How can the Chinese manufacturers achieve such level of success? Well, first of all, they have really managed to hone their skills and reduce the cost into a fine art. On the left-hand side chart, you will see from our battery cost modeling in CRU services. So we have taken and compared the average battery cost of the 811 batteries between China, South Korea, Europe, and the US. So unsurprisingly, labor cost in China is low. But it's very interestingly because the material cost as well as processing cost in China is also significantly lower. Now, because battery comprise the biggest cost of EV, so cheaper battery means cheaper EV. In the middle chart, you will see, if you take the vehicles of the same performance and same driver range and compare the cost ex VAT for those in China versus in Germany, for example, you can see the Chinese vehicles really have a huge cost advantage. So here, we would like to highlight the key strategies the Chinese manufacturers has adopted, perhaps way earlier than the West counterparts. It is called the vertical integration. So this is the chart that we take from our battery value chain services. Unlike the traditional method, which only looking at the production by their region, our database examined the production by ownership. Now, the dark red chart, the dark red color shows the production within the Chinese territory. Although at first glance, China doesn't possess much resources such as nickel and cobalt, The landscape has shifted drastically when you include those Chinese ownership overseas, showing in the light red chart. Now, this vertical integration strategy is really crucial because it not only allows the Chinese battery manufacturers as OEMs to secure their raw material supply. Effectively, through vertical integration, they can remove the material and processing cost from their production cost and achieve cost competitiveness. Now, perhaps the other way around to examine the financial benefit of the vertical integration is to looking at the profit margins. Now here, we zoom into China and looking at the leading manufacturers across the value chain. Now, so there are some very interesting findings. Again, this is from our battery value chain services. So first findings is that the top lithium producers are still managed to maintain high profit margins even through these difficult times. And particularly for those who have access to high quality, cheaper ore, as well as manage to integrate the ore to refinery process. Now, if you're looking at the midstream, it's a little bit counterintuitive because we think that perhaps the lower raw material costs would benefit the PCAM and CAM producers, but that's not the reality. Because if you're looking at the right-hand side chart, the CAM sales price is also directly correlated to the raw material prices. In reality, it is the downstream, the battery manufacturers, particularly those leading ones such as CATL, who capitalize the low price environment. Now, if you're looking closer into the midstreams, there's also an interesting dichotomy. For those leading producers who managed to secure their raw material supply and early on negotiate a partnership with the OEM, they have managed to stand out compared to their counterparts. So the companies such as CNGR and Huayou, for example. Despite the low prices, they can navigate quite well and maintain relatively high profit margin, even though this exact midstream sector are being squeezed. Now, the competitiveness of the Chinese vehicles have left the rest of the world of the manufacturers and policymakers to two options. One, continue to innovate and collaborate. And the second one is to level the playfield. And this is exactly what the US IRA is trying to do. Because if left unchecked, the Chinese manufacturers will quickly fill the void. So in the next section, I would like to briefly touch two of the most important parts of the US IRA policy. So the first part is 45X, which is directly benefiting the battery manufacturers as well as suppliers. The condition is that you have to build a plant within the US territory. So for example, if you are battery manufacturers and you invest a plant in the US, for 1 kilowatt-hour of battery you produce and manufacture in the US, you can obtain $35 of tax credit. Now, this is really important because this tax credit has really provided strong financial incentive to appeal the manufacturers in South Korea and Japan to flow into the US. And on the right-hand side chart, you can see that the operating profit, and we have highlights in the light blue color of those operating profit as a direct result of the tax benefit. So toward the end of Q4, you can see increasingly that tax credit has taken a huge chunk benefiting for those suppliers. Another critical component for the IRA is the Clean Vehicle Tax Credit, which is 30D. So this, unlike the 45X, provides direct incentives for the consumers and OEMs. So consumers are eligible to claim the $7,500 tax credit at the point of sale, provided vehicles that meet certain requirements. One of those are FEOC, Foreign Entity of Concern. Due to time constraint, I won't detail here, but what you need to know is that at this moment, the OEMs are facing increasing pressures to disentangle themselves from the cheaper Chinese suppliers, and they really struggle to meet the critical mineral requirement in order to qualify for the tax credit. For the raw materials producers in FTA countries, the 30D tax credit represents a significant opportunity. During our recent trip in South Korea, in our seminar, discussion with manufacturers highlight several key issues. So on the right-hand side, there are 3 key questions that frequently mentioned during our discussion. One of them particularly stand out. Are OEM willing to pass on and share the 7,500 tax credit with their suppliers? Now, this slide categorizes the global supply chain risk profiles. Be looking at the bottom chart. So this is the dark blue color, and these are the compliant supply and qualify for the IRA. But it's also important to know that not all of them are available because some of them have already locked in the long-term agreement with other suppliers. For example, the Chilean lithium is already locked in with the Chinese producers, so they're not available for the North American market. On the top right side is the foreign entity of concern. Effectively, if you touch these raw material sources, immediately you would disqualify for the all tax credit. So what we also have done here is to show you that the yellow dotted line, so that is the demand as a proportion of supply. So the gist of this chart is to show you the relative deficit across the value chain when considering the investment opportunities. For example, there is huge potentials in nickel sulfate compared to, say, CAM, for example. And worth mention that during our conversation with the manufacturers, particularly with the OEMs, the discussion of the IRA premium is a bit tricky because for OEMs, of course, they would like to meet the obligation of the IRA, but another key consideration is that whether the benefit resulting from the tax credit would worth the price to pay in order to secure the raw material. So the cost control is particularly pressing in this low price environment. Now, in this chart, we have also laid out the strategic roadmap for the OEMs. So for raw material producers, the evolving landscape, as those OEMs, battery and cathode manufacturers outside of China, navigating the intensifying competition, present 2 major opportunities. Firstly, there's a continuous push to increase the energy density and reduce the consumption of raw materials, thereby lowering cost for high-end, long-range vehicles and improving cost-performance ratio. Now, this strategy predominantly benefits producers for nickel and lithium hydroxide producers. Another perhaps a little bit overlooked opportunity lies in the shift towards the lower range and affordable market. So you can see from the right-hand side, so there is an increasing color of the yellow represent manganese-based batteries, and the blue illustrates the iron-based batteries. Now, historically, this segment is constrained by supply chain and cost issues. And now, the ex-Chinese OEMs see growing opportunities. With the support of South Korean and Japanese producers, Western OEMs are aiming to break into this market. And this shift opened up more opportunities, particularly for lithium carbonate, the most common and economic feasible option for producing iron-based batteries, as well as some manganese-based batteries. So currently, excluding nickel operation from Indonesia, China, and Russia, North America and Europe have access to just over 26% of global nickel mine production, highlighting the opportunities for Australian producers to form partnership. However, a major obstacle in establishing this partnership is a cost comparison with the nickel produced in Indonesia. When fully integrated, HPAL operations, shown in the yellow on our left-hand side chart, are highly cost-effective. Our latest data from the nickel cost curve have placed them into the first and the second quartile, and they are expanding at alarming speed. Additionally, As these operations reach steady-state production, their operating costs continue to decline. Now, there's 3 primary barriers preventing Indonesian nickel from entering the US and EU. First of all, Indonesia is not an FTA country, which fails to meet the critical mineral requirements set forth in the 30D tax credit we mentioned earlier. Second, there is a significant Chinese involvement in most of the HPAL operations in Indonesia, which pose a risk. While current regulations do not consider Chinese companies' overseas subsidiaries under the Foreign Entity of Concern, FEOC rules, there is always the possibility that the US regulators could revise a clause, a risk the Western OEMs might not want to take. Lastly, the perception of the carbon footprint. The predominant use of coal-fired power plant in Indonesian nickel operations has raised a lot of carbon emission concerns. However, it's worth noting that the HPAL operations in Indonesia emit a considerably less CO2. On average, if you see on the right-hand side chart, around 8 to 10 tons of CO2 is produced in Indonesian HPAL per ton of nickel they produce. So this is a stark contrast compared to the NPI, for example, which produce around 60 to 80 tons of CO2. So this justification could potentially provide Western OEMs with a basis to lobby the local regulators for approval for Indonesian nickel. Sorry. This is my final slide. The landscape for lithium is slightly different. Australian lithium miners are well positioned, benefiting from some of the world's largest and higher quality deposits with convenient port access. This strategic advantage established them as low-cost supplier with a robust project pipeline. On the right-hand side, you will notice that we have outlined the expected increase in primary lithium production annually over the next 5 years, with FTA countries highlighting yellow. Argentina and Australia are poised to be key drivers of industrial growth. Australia, in particular, holds a significant edge as a favored partner of the US and EU, with substantial potential gains from the IRA due to extensive brownfield expansion on the left-hand side of the pegmatite cost curve. Integrating mine refinery operation could further enhance advantage for producers. The bifurcation of both low and high driving range market required by the OEMs outside of China also presents opportunities for producing both hydroxide and carbonized. However, the current low price environment poses challenge, constraining capital investment in lithium operations and projects. Greenfield producers at the higher end of the cost curve in Australia are particularly vulnerable, as initial operating costs are typically high. The previous closure of world-class operation like Wodgina during the last market downturn, now operational cost was well below $600, exactly underscore this risk. These new operations also face competition from Chinese lepidolite producers, showing on the dark blue, who can quickly and cheaply restart operations. Finally, I would like to highlight that it is crucial for the policymakers to safeguard interest in the brownfield operations and support greenfield projects through challenging times. For lithium producers, success hinges on adopting an integrated processing route, diversifying products, and securing partnership with battery and OEM producers who can potentially provide essential capital injection. Thank you so much.